which is very wonderful. And we're so great and grateful to have you here today with us. And she's going to give us a presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me okay. All right. So let's just say a quick prayer. Father and our God, we thank you for our lives. Thank you, O Lord, for the opportunity to be here. We pray, O Lord, that you'll minister to us, help us learn that which you need us to know. And at the end, we ask, O Lord, that you take all the glory in Jesus' name. All right, so thank you very much to everyone for being here. Thank you to the leadership and the organizers of the conference for allowing me be a part of the breakout session. So my name is Lajipe. I'm an immigration and mobility advisor at McMaster University. I'm also the principal consultant at Children Consulting. So like Jaya said, I came into Canada as an international student, and I got into immigration because I found it relatively easy to just complete applications and to find information, and people were always asking me for help. And so after a while, I decided to get licensed, and then I started my business helping people. So today we'll just be talking about status in Canada. So just key things you need to know as either a student worker or just in case there are permanent residents and citizens on this breakout session. Just some things that you need to be aware of. We'll be talking about working in Canada, the postgraduate work permit, which is a permit that's available when you complete your studies as a student. Becoming a permanent resident, what are the options available to you, becoming a citizen, if you want to bring your family over, and most importantly, I'll be talking about some of the updates that have happened with immigration due to COVID-19, and then we'll have a question and answer session for you to ask whatever questions that you have. All right, so just some important things to note based on your status in Canada. It's really heartbreaking when I hear of students who have had to leave the country because of something simple like, forgetting to renew or extend their study permits. These are very simple but still important things that you should note. So, I mean, for everyone, whether you're a student, worker, permanent resident, or citizen, it's clear that you should obey the laws. We're Christians. We should be a shining light. We should be an example. I would like to say that, lying on your document, fudging, lying on your application, fudging documents, those are complete no-no. Apart from the fact that we're Christians, immigration does their due diligence. They do the research, they go online. And so even if it's years later that they find out that information, the status can be revoked, right? So for students, it's very important that you note the expiry date on your study permits and be sure to apply to extend that before it expires. Don't wait for it to expire. You don't want to be in that position. So set a reminder on your phone, just if it's expiring maybe in August, by, I would say, end of June, you should start looking at the process. By July, you should have applied to extend your study permits. If you're traveling, so whether you're a student or a worker and you're traveling outside Canada, make sure that you have a valid visa. Your study permit or your work permit is not a visa. It doesn't allow you to come into Canada. What it does is it allows you to study or work. So you still need a visa. So make sure anytime you're traveling that you always have a valid visa to enable you come back. Another thing that's very important for students to note is that you don't work more than the stipulated 20 hours during school sessions. Most students are allowed to work. It should say on your study permit that you're eligible to work on or off campus. And then once it says that you can work on campus, there's no limit to the number of hours you can work on campus. But off campus, you can only work 20 hours a week, and you cannot work more than 20 hours a week. Some people will say, oh, how do they know? your pay slips, everything is sent to Service Canada. If immigration wants, they can request those documents, and then they can tell if someone's been working more than the hours that they're supposed to. There is an update on this for essential workers due to COVID, and we'll talk about that when we talk about COVID updates. But otherwise, it's very important that you don't. Last year, I think, towards the end of last year, there was a student who was facing deportation for working more than the stipulated 20 hours during school session. Once you're on your break, so either a December break or a summer break, you can work more than 20 hours. You can work full time as long as your school is closed during that period. So another thing to note for workers is that if you're on a postgraduate work permit, so you came here as a student, got your postgraduate work permit, if you plan to stay in Canada, you should apply for the permanent residency before your postgraduate work permit expires. And we'll talk about postgraduate work permits shortly. It's a one-time thing, so you want to make sure that you make use of it, and that if you're if you want to transition, that you transition before it expires. If you're here on maybe an open work permit or an employer-specific work permit, again, be aware of expiry dates. Confirm with your employer for extensions. Don't leave things till the last minute. All right, so I talked about maintaining status as a student. So here are some key things that you need to know in order for you to meet the conditions of your study permit. So if you don't meet these conditions, you may lose your student status and study permit, and you may also have to leave Canada. So one thing is that you have to continuously be enrolled at a DLI. A DLI is a designated learning institution, and that is your school. So most schools are DLIs. You wouldn't get a study permit otherwise if the school was not a DLI. So you have to be full-time. You have to be a full-time student, especially if you plan to apply for the postgraduate work permit at the end of your studies. You have to make progress towards completing your studies. So what that means is that you're actually registering in courses and you're passing those courses. Yes, things happen, but if someone is not making any progress, it's been 2 years, 3 years, they're not making any progress towards their studies, and then they apply, for example, to extend their study permit, it most likely won't be approved. So no unauthorized leave. So this is really important. If you're taking a break from studies, you don't need to tell immigration, but you need to keep proof just in case an officer should ask for that in a later application. So authorized leave can be things like medical reasons, or getting pregnant, having a family emergency, death or serious illness of a family member, and any other type of leave your school authorizes. So very important though, if you're taking a break from school, go see them at your school, ask for a letter of permission, giving you that time. Another thing that counts as authorized leave is if your school has closed permanently or because of a strike. If you change schools, or your school deferred your program start date. So again, life happens. You can take a break from your studies. You just need to make sure that it's an authorized one from your school. In cases where you do take this break, you have to resume studies within 150 days. So you have to, your break cannot be more than 150 days. If it's going to be more than 150 days, you need to either leave Canada or apply to change your status to visitor. Again, these are key things that you don't want to, it's very important that you maintain your status here, again, especially if your end goal is to become a permanent resident. Another thing to note is that you cannot work during an authorized leave because you're no longer a student at that time. So you'd have to wait until you resume your studies before you start working again. Another thing to note is if you're taking a break from studies due to financial constraints, so maybe that an emergency has happened and you're no longer able to afford your fees at that time, there is something called a Destitute work permit, which you can apply for, and they will give you a work permit for a semester. Again, ideally, if you're taking a break from studies for anything other than financial reasons, then you shouldn't be applying for that work permit. But if it's for financial reasons and you can prove that it was not your intention. So, maybe you came to Canada with money, your parents are the ones sponsoring you, but then somehow they're not able to send money to you. And so you're stuck. That way you can apply for that destitute work permit. And this will keep you in good standing for that period. So if you change schools, you need to let immigration know. It's very easy. You go online and there is a link on the CIC, the immigration website, where you fill in the information for the new school, and then that just lets immigration know that you're attending another school. And what happens is typically every semester, immigration will send they'll request information from schools to confirm students. And so if you've changed schools and you didn't let immigration know that you were changing schools, so say, for example, you're attending McMaster University, but you've changed to Mohawk College. I'm using that example because I'm here in Hamilton. If immigration is sending out confirmation, they will send it to McMaster University, but you're no longer there, and McMaster will say, this person is no longer here, and then immigration will probably assume that you've abandoned your studies. So it's very important that if you're changing school, that you should let immigration know. Work only as permitted, I've already talked about that. Any other conditions that are specified on your work permit, or study permits. So some people might say that you're not allowed to work in healthcare related positions, so don't work in health-related positions. If you're no longer meeting the conditions of being a student, so you should either change your status or leave Canada. Another thing is that if you finish your studies later than expected, so your program was supposed to be 3 years, but somehow you find it that it's taking you 4 years, then you apply to extend your study permits at least 30 days before it finishes. Now, if you finish your studies earlier than expected, one thing to know is that your study permits will expire 90 days after you complete your studies. And so I'll just go to the next slide and show you an example here. All right, so you're no longer deemed a student 90 days after your study ends, regardless of the expiry date on your study permits. So if your study permits expires, let's say December 30, 2021, that's next year, and you're going to complete your studies by December of this year. By March 30 of next year, your study permit is no longer valid. So within that period, you should either have changed your status or you should leave Canada. This is very, very important. I've seen a lot of people make this mistake because they feel like, oh, my study, okay, a really good example is that you came in for a university program, which is a 4-year program. And so you get a 4-year study permits, but somehow you decide to go to college instead and complete a 2-year program. And so after the end of 2 years, most people feel like they still have another 2 years left on your study permit. No, unless you're starting another program, within that period, your study permit will become invalid 90 days after that. So I'm stressing this because it's really important. It's really important information that a lot of people don't know. So now, talking about extending study permits, if somehow you forget, again, the best practice is to stay on top of your expiry date so that you can renew or extend your documents on time. But sometimes life happens. So what do you do in this situation? If your study permit or your work permit has expired, you typically have 90 days after your status expires to apply for restoration of status. This has currently changed temporarily this year due to COVID. Again, we'll talk about the COVID updates, but ideally, you have 90 days to apply for a restoration of status. After 90 days, you have to leave Canada immediately, wait 6 months, and then reapply, and then include an explanation letter. Don't don't let it get to that point. Ideally, you shouldn't even let it get to the point of restoration of status unless it's something beyond your control. While you've applied for a restoration of status, you cannot work or study. You have to wait until a decision has been made. Okay, so again, you don't want to wait until it gets to this point, but life happens, and if you find yourself in this situation within 3 months, so that's 90 days, you can apply for a restoration of status to put yourself back in line. Right. Okay, so talking about working in Canada, as a full-time student that has a valid study permit, you have a social insurance number, you can work unlimited on campus. Again, your study permit will say that you are eligible to work on or off campus. If your study permit doesn't have that statement on it, then you need to apply to change the conditions of your study permit. It's a paper application. So you send in an application, and provide proof that you're a full-time student, you have a valid study permit, and so you want to be able to work on and off campus. So again, there's no limit to the hours of work on campus, but off campus, you can only work 20 hours per week. During scheduled breaks such as the Christmas break and summer break, you can work full-time. So if you are in a co-op or an internship program, you need a separate work permit for this. And this is because typically in co-op, you're working full-time. And so you need to apply for a co-op work permit that allows you to participate in that. You must stop working when you're no longer studying full-time or when your study permit has expired. So again, this brings us back to when you complete your studies. You have to apply for a postgraduate work permit once you're within 3 months of completing your studies, if you plan to continue working. Because yes, you have 6 months to apply for the postgraduate work permit, but you need to be in status, right? You don't want to lose your status in Canada. And so that's why I keep, talking about status. You need to maintain your status in Canada. If it's either you're maintaining it as a student or you switch to being a visitor or you apply for a work permit, it's important that you always have status at any given point in time, either as a student, visitor, or worker. All right, so now we'll talk about the postgraduate work permit. So I like to refer to this as the golden ticket. So it allows you to stay and work in Canada after graduation, and it's a really good pathway to becoming a permanent resident. For the most part, you'll get a postgraduate work permit that's equivalent to the length of your studies. So I talked about applying within 180 days. So you have 6 months, which is 180 days, to apply for this postgraduate work permit. If you apply after 6 months, the application will be refused, and then you'd have to requalify. So in that case, that would mean going back to school maybe for another year to become eligible again. So very important that you apply within that period. They've made it easy now that you can apply whether you're within Canada or outside Canada. So if you complete your studies and you need to take a quick trip back home, you can still apply for the postgraduate work permit. So when I was talking about the eligibility, the validity of your study permit. Now, even though you have 6 months to apply for a postgraduate work permit, remember that your study permit will become invalid after 90 days. So if you're planning to apply for the postgraduate work permit maybe in the 4th or the 5th month, what you're going to do then is apply to change your status to a visitor first. This will cost you more money. So unless there is a really strong reason why you're applying for the postgraduate work permit at a later date, it's better to just apply and have that in hand. Otherwise, once you've completed your studies, remember that 3 months after you've completed your studies, your study permit is no longer valid and you need to maintain status. So either you're changing your status to a visitor or you have to leave Canada. But if you apply for the postgraduate work permit, then you can stay and wait for that to be approved. So the one thing to note is that you can only get it once. If you've gotten a postgraduate work permit, you have to use it wisely. You can only get it once. You cannot, so if you complete your studies, you apply for a postgraduate work permit, for example, and then you decide to go back to grad school and not use that work permit that time, when you complete grad school, you won't be able to apply for another postgraduate work permit. So it can only be issued to a person once. In order to be eligible, very important that you maintain full-time status throughout your studies, so that you're taking whatever your school considers as full-time. The last semester is exempt. So if you're in your last semester and for some reason, maybe you only have 2 courses left, and so you're part-time in your last semester, that's fine. That does not make you ineligible. So you should start the application, again, as soon as possible. Don't wait till the last minute. Even though it says that you have 180 days, there's no reason for you to wait for the 180 days. And the other key thing to note is that as long as you apply for that postgraduate work permit before the study permit expires or becomes invalid, you can actually start working while waiting for a decision. But if you wait, if you're applying for the postgraduate work permit, maybe you've switched your status to a visitor, or you've lost your status, then you can't work. You have to wait until the application is approved. Typically, the application was taking a really long time. Thankfully, due to COVID, it's taking a shorter time these days, right? So, but again, that's just something to be very mindful of. If you're on a postgraduate work permit, a regular work permit, a spousal work permit, make sure you note the expiry date. So again, very important that you're extending any permits before they expire. Don't share your SIN with anybody. There's been a lot of scam. I get those calls almost every day, calling you, telling you that there's fraud on your SIN or that there's a case against you. Service Canada will not call you and ask you for your social insurance number. So be aware of that. Don't share your SIN number with anybody. If the person's calling from Service Canada, tell them that you go to Service Canada in person. You don't share any information with them. If your plan is to apply for permanent residency, then it's very important the kind of work that you choose to do with your work permit. Whether you're on a postgraduate work permit or a regular one, employer-specific, spousal. The qualifying jobs are either skilled work, which is so managerial jobs, professional jobs, technical jobs, or skills trades. So trades are things like equipment operators, plumbers, carpenters, electricians. For the skilled work, managerial jobs are definitely jobs where you're supervising or managing people. Professional jobs are things like being a dentist, being a human resource professional, being an engineer. Technical jobs are things like being an admin officer or admin assistant, technical sales rep. There is a detailed, if you go on the immigration website, you can actually type in your job title and then it will, come up with some suggestions on whether your job is skilled or not. If your job is classified as a C or a D, that will not be eligible for permanent residency. So again, if your goal is to become a permanent resident, then you need to pick whatever work that you're doing wisely. Now, in some cases, you might need to start out in a C-level job, maybe for a couple of months to move into a B-level job. So, for example, someone that wants to work in the bank, most times you come in as a sales representative. The front desk, most times you come in as front desk. Front desk is not a skilled job. Canada doesn't qualify as a skilled job. So you might need to start in that level and then maybe take some exams, and then you become a financial sales advisor, financial advisor, which is a B job. And then, you work in that for a year and you would have enough work experience to apply for permanent residency. So I'll talk a little bit more about choosing your Noc code and how to know what jobs qualify shortly. So moving into becoming a permanent resident, there are several ways for you to become a permanent resident. The most popular one is express entry, which most people are aware of. And under that, you have the federal skilled worker, the federal skilled trades, the Canadian experience class. In some cases, again, most people will qualify through the express entry. Now, in some cases, some people don't qualify due to different factors. And so then you can look at either provincial nomination or even other programs such as the Atlantic Immigration Program and the Rural and Northern Immigration Program. So depending on what province you live in, some provinces like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they actually have programs for their international students to become permanent residents. Ontario has one as well, but it's for master's and PhD students. The master's program is usually like it fills up the minute it opens up. So again, most people will qualify through the regular express entry, but in some cases you might need to look towards provincial nomination to boost your points. Now, most students who have completed their degree in Canada and have at least 1 year of full-time work experience in Canada will qualify. So one thing to note is work experience is a very key factor to qualifying for permanent residency. So either through the federal skilled worker program or the skills trades or the Canadian experience class, you need to have work experience. If you have work experience from back home, as long as that work experience was paid and it was after you completed your studies, you can use that as well. And that actually gives you a higher advantage. So you have to pass the language exam, whether you schooled in Canada or not. You have to either take the English or French exam. The education assessment is not needed for students in Canada if you completed your degree in Canada. However, if you have a bachelor's from outside Canada, for example, and you're doing maybe a diploma or a certificate here in Canada, I would advise that you still complete the educational assessment for your previous degree so that you can get higher points on the express entry pool. So having 2 degrees obviously is better than 1. Having a master's is higher than having 2 degrees, and then the highest is PhD. So depending on your highest level of education, the higher your points. Now, the other thing is proof of funds, and I have a separate slide where I'll talk about that. So talking about choosing your NOC. So NOC is the National Occupation Classification, and it's just a code system that the government uses for jobs. Now, in order to qualify for permanent residency, it needs to be a skilled job, right? So skilled jobs are classified as 0, A, or B. 0 is managerial jobs that I talked about earlier. A is professional jobs, and B is technical jobs. Now, when you go on the website and you type in your job title, so sometimes there might be separate codes, different codes that come up. And so sometimes people will just pick a code based on title alone. Don't do that. What you want to do is, open up, maybe if 3 different codes come up, you open them up and then you read the lead statements and make sure that the lead statement matches what you're doing, and that the duties, you're able to match that at least 90%. An example that I like to give people is, if you say that you're a doctor, but your duties relate more to being a nurse, then immigration is going to say that you're not a doctor. They look at the actual job duties more than they look at the title. Okay. Part-time work is also okay. You can be working part-time. It just needs to be equivalent to full-time hours. So full-time hours for immigration purposes is considered 30 hours a week. So if you're working in a part-time job 15 hours a week, it will take you 2 years to get a 1 year, the equivalent of 1 year. Now, if you're working at 2 part-time jobs, 15 hours and maybe 18 hours, then that's equivalent to having full-time hours. So talking about the language exam, IELTS and CELPIP are the recognized ones. If you speak French, that is a really great advantage for you. You can easily get extra points that can boost your profile. Another thing to note is that don't aim for the minimum CLB 7. 9 or higher is ideal. The minimum typically, and I have a sample profile that I'll show shortly. The minimum is just what it is. It's a minimum. It doesn't really get you an invitation. Typically, when you aim for the minimum score, your score is not high enough to get an invitation. All right, so okay, talked about that. Okay, so talking about the express entry, the comprehensive ranking system is used to determine your rank and your score in the pool. So you get things, I was talking about points earlier. You get points for your age, you get points for your education, you get points for language, you get points for adaptability. So adaptability being things like having Canadian education or working in Canada. So one thing that I always advise is that once you have the English exam, or French exam, especially for people who are here in Canada and don't need the education assessment, once you have your work experience and you've completed your language exam, go ahead and submit a profile into the pool. You can't get an invitation if you're not in the pool. No matter how low your score is, still, get into the pool and then start looking for ways to improve your score. If there are any changes that happen, so say for example you rewrite the English exam, then you can go into your profile and update that. But if you're waiting out and saying, oh, my score isn't high enough, I'm just going to wait and see what happens. If the points ever drop, then you don't get an invitation, right? So it's better that you stay in the pool and then look for ways to improve your profile. So I was talking about earlier, you can look at provincial nomination, for example, or in some cases, if your employer is able to sponsor you, that can also help you towards your permanent residency application. Another thing to note is that when you submit your profile into the express entry pool, the profile is valid for a year. After a year, it will expire. Doesn't really mean anything. Just go back in there and submit the application. Again, ideally, you shouldn't be waiting up to a year. You should be looking for ways to improve your profile, okay? So now, I'm focusing on the Canadian experience class because we are in Canada. So the requirements for that, for the language test, you need a minimum level 7 if you're in a professional or technical job, and a minimum level 5 if you're in a, minimum level 7 if you're in a managerial or technical job or professional job, and minimum level 5 if you're in a technical job. Again, you shouldn't be aiming for the minimums. You should be aiming for a level 9 or higher. You need at least 1 year of skilled work experience in Canada in the last 3 years. So full-time in the last full-time and gained legally, so on a work permit, either an open work permit or postgraduate work permit. There is no education requirements. Again, this is like the Canadian experience class is for people who have already adapted to Canada, so it's like a quick score points for Canada, who's looking for people to come in and contribute. You're already here, you're already working, and so the requirements are pretty minimal. So pass your English language, have 1 year of skilled work experience, and that's pretty much it. So talking about documents that you need, your passport, obviously, the language test results, the education credential assessment, which is the ECA, is needed if you have a previous degree from outside Canada that you want to get points for. So if you're studying your master's, for example, here, you don't need to assess your bachelor's from another country, because your master's will give you a higher point in that case. Employment letter is really, really important. You want to make sure that the duties being described match the duties described on the NOC, the code that we were talking about, the National Occupation Code. You have to make sure that it aligns. Immigration they don't know what a lawyer does, or they don't know what a admin person does. So they go to that website and they look at those duties or whatever code that you've claimed, and then they look at your employment letter to see if it matches. So you have to complete a medical exam, you have to get police certificate for any country that you've lived in since you were 18 or older for more than 6 months. Now, for Canada, if you're in Canada, you don't need a police certificate for Canada. You only need it for countries outside Canada. So now we go to proof of funds. The proof of funds is just money to show that you can provide for yourself in that first year after becoming a permanent resident. Now, for people who qualify under the Canadian Experience class, you actually don't need the proof of funds. But I still advise that you put some money in your account, and then you provide your pay slips. Again, you're showing that you have, you're able to take care of yourself. So just in terms of how much money to budget for, this whole process, the language exam is about $170 or more. Some people pay like $250. Educational assessment, if you're doing it, the most popular one is WES, but there are about 4. There's IQAS as well, and it's usually about $220 or more. Application fees are fees that you pay to the government. So right now it's $1,410 per adult. The proof of funds, so just a sample, depends on how big your family is. A family of 1, they expect you to have $12,960 in your account. Again, this is not money that you're paying anybody. It's just money that you're showing that you can take care of yourself. And if you're already working in Canada, you actually don't have to have this amount, but you can put maybe $4,000, $5,000, and then provide your pay slips. Again, you just want to prove to the officer that you can take care of yourself in Canada. Medicals, police report, things like that, you can just budget about $300. Now, a lot of this application is pretty straightforward and you can do it yourself. If you decide that you want to use an immigration consultant or an immigration lawyer, be sure that they're licensed and that they have the experience with your particular situation. So don't be afraid to ask them questions. Let them prove to you that they can handle your case. For most people who have studied in Canada, I typically advise you can do it yourself. What you could do instead is opt for a guidance review. So just get the lawyer or the consultant to review your application before you submit it. And you can save a lot of money, that way. So here is a sample profile of a single applicant, so not married, with 1 year Canadian work experience and Canadian education. So if you can see here with the level 7, which is the minimum requirement, this person is scoring 394. And then you see here when you get a level 9, it's 462. So there's a huge difference. Just the only thing that has changed between these two profiles is the English exam. So again, this is why I keep stressing that you don't aim for the minimum level 7. It gets you into the pool, but it doesn't necessarily get you an invitation. So there was a draw on Thursday for Canadian Experience class, and the lowest CRS there was 445. So this is just for you to have an idea of how the draws run. When they do the general draws, which is not Canadian Experience specific, the scores are usually higher, 470s. For this year, it's been in the 470s. But for the Canadian Experience class, it's actually dropped as low as 435 or so. But then this last one was 445. So again, all this to say that your English language score is very important. Don't aim for the minimum. Okay. So just talking about citizenship, I'll just brief through this quickly so we can spend more time answering questions. So to become a citizen, you have to be a permanent resident, have lived in Canada for 3 out of the last 5 years. You have to have filed your taxes if you're required to. You pass a test and then prove your language skills. So yes, you will have to take, if you're English exam has expired by the time you're applying for citizenship, you have to take that again. So it costs about $630 per adult. Again, you apply for the citizenship. It takes, depending on where you live, it could take anything from about 4 months to a year. Then you would be invited for a test and interview. Some exemptions may apply. So some people, for example, if you're 55 years and up, you may not need to take the test and interview. And then after that, you take the oath of citizenship and ceremony. Test is pretty straightforward. Just asks you, there's just 20 questions. It's objective and just about rights and responsibilities of Canadians, history, geography, government, and all that. So talking about bringing your family here, okay, perfect. So depending on your current status in Canada, your family can either visit, study, work, or become PR. So for your family to visit, what you really want to do is provide them an invitation letter. Your family member will need to meet all other requirements, so showing that they have money for the trip, and most importantly, they should prove that they will be going back home when they're done their visit. If you're here as a student or a worker, so you're on a study permit or a work permit, your spouse or your kids can join you. And so your spouse would be eligible for an open work permit. This is really great, especially for permanent residency, because by the time you're applying for permanent residency, if your spouse has a year already of Canadian work experience, then you get extra points again in the comprehensive ranking system. And your kids can attend public school for free. So this is a really great advantage. If you're here studying or working, you can bring your family to join you. As a permanent resident or citizen, you can actually sponsor your spouse or your children or your parents and grandparents to become permanent residents. Some provinces, like Manitoba, actually have a family program where people are able to nominate their family members to come to Canada and become permanent residents. All right, so I'll talk about the COVID updates. So just some things to be aware of due to COVID, and then we'll start taking questions if there are any. So right now, there's a travel ban in place. There's restrictions for people who are entering Canada. The only people who can enter Canada at the moment are citizens and permanent residents, immediate family members of citizens and permanent residents, temporary foreign workers, and international students. So international students whose permits were approved before March 18th can come into Canada. If you're a worker too, you can come in, and then if you're a permanent resident or citizen or your immediate family members, they can come in. It can't be for tourism purposes. It has to be for an essential reason. Okay. So, and if it's for a visit, it has to be more than 15 days because you need to quarantine for 2 weeks out of that for 14 days. So, so for expiring study permits, you can apply online to extend your study permits. It's actually taking, I think I submitted an application last week or not 2 weeks ago, and I got a response in about 3 days. So it's really fast right now. If your study permit is expiring, you want to make sure that you extend it. Yes, there are reduced hours and all, but immigration is still working and they're prioritizing things like that. So if you've completed your studies, then you should apply for a postgraduate work permit. Or if you've completed your studies, but you're not applying for postgraduate work permit, then you should change your status to visitor. So even though there's COVID, that's not an excuse for you to be out of status. So make sure that you maintain your status. For study permit compliance, if your school has moved online or is suspended due to COVID-19, you're fine. Stay enrolled. And then if they're offering online studying, you can go ahead with that. That will not affect your eligibility for postgraduate work permits, and it won't affect your study permit. So, follow whatever your school is advising. Now, if your school has closed permanently due to COVID-19, you have 150 days to either enroll in a new program or school, change your status to visitor, or leave Canada. So this is directly from the immigration website. Okay, it's very important. Some schools have had to close; they're not able to manage. I think some private schools are not able to manage, and they've had to close. So if you're in that situation, you should be looking for another school to resume at within 150 days. So you can continue to work even if you've become a part-time student or had to take a break in your studies because of COVID. So they're waiving that requirement at the moment. But the 20 hours during school session still stands, and then you can work full-time during scheduled breaks. Now, if you're working in essential services, and you can go on the immigration website to check what is considered essential services, you can work more than 20 hours per week, as long as you're a study permit holder and you're eligible to work off campus and you're providing an essential service. Now, this change is in effect until August 31st. So after August 31st, you'll no longer be able to work more than 20 hours, or they might extend it. So that's something to keep an eye out of. But if you're not working in an essential service and then you feel like, oh, because my school is online right now, I can work more hours, don't do that. You can only do the 20 hours. So again, confirmation of permanent residency and citizenship ceremonies are typically being conducted online for some applicants. Immigration will contact you and let you know if you need to complete any of that online. You can't go to the border right now for those services. Applications are still being processed. So this is actually a good time to, as long as you have all your documents, it's a good time to submit your application. Things are changing rapidly. And I've actually had a few clients who had, really low scores and weren't sure how they were going to get an invitation during this period because the scores dropped when they were doing the Canadian experience specific draws. So another thing to note is that international students and temporary workers are actually eligible for the Canada Emergency Response Benefits, as long as you meet all the other requirements. So even though you're not a citizen or a permanent resident, you can actually apply for the CERB as long as you meet all the other requirements. Now, I was talking about the restoration of status extension. So due to COVID, again, immigration has said that if your permits expired after January 30th of this year, you actually have until the end of the year to apply for a restoration of status. Again, I'm not sure why you want to wait that long. You won't be able to work, you won't be able to study, you won't be able to do anything. I mean, it's there for convenience, but you don't necessarily have to wait, that long. Don't even wait for your permit to expire before you apply to extend it. Another thing I wanted to touch on is if you have family members, so for example, I have my grandma here. She was visiting when the whole corona situation happened and, flights got canceled. And so usually you can stay in Canada on a visit for up to 6 months. After 6 months, you have to leave Canada. If you have family members or friends who are currently in Canada as visitors and they're staying more than the 6 months due to COVID, you should go online and apply to extend their stay so that they maintain status here. Okay, so that it doesn't affect them in the future if they want to visit Canada. Then you say, oh, you stayed more than you were allowed to the last time you came. So you can avoid that by applying to extend their stay. Another thing to note is that if you can't get documents, your medical, biometrics, and things like that completed, still submit your application, provide an explanation letter. They will not refuse your application due to not being able to get those documents. Now, things like the English language exam, which are like strong requirements, you have to have that to submit. Now, for now, I know that some of those, so IELTS, they started offering online testing. Immigration has not said that they will be accepting this for permanent residency. So, I mean, if you want to use that to practice, go ahead. But until they announce that they can accept those, you won't be able to use it for immigration purposes. So, another thing to know for the CERB is that if you quit your work voluntarily, then you cannot apply. So if you just decide that, maybe you're worried and you don't want to go to work anymore because of COVID, then you would not be eligible for the CERB. So once again, I've come to the end. Once again, I want to thank the leadership and the organizers for the opportunity for me to speak on something that is really dear to my heart. I I don't like it when people make, mistakes when it comes to immigration, or when they could have done something so easy, and then, it's taking them forever to get that particular thing done. So I hope that you've gained at least one key thing that will stick with you from this presentation. You should know that knowledge is important. So, find the correct information. No one knows it all. Talk to people who have been through the process. If you need to use a consultant, use one. Ask your friends around. Prayer is also key. Commit all you're doing to God's hand. So some things might not work for someone, but it work for you because you're a child of God. Again, not asking you to do anything that is illegal, but if you're doing things properly and then you commit it into God's hands, and then, God will perfect all of it. So, again, key things, you need to be aware of expiry dates. Don't get out of status. It's just not worth it. Plan ahead, ensure all your documents are valid and available. I already talked about, talking to people around you. And so, all in all, just make sure that, whatever information it is that you need, don't wait till the last minute before looking for it. You don't want to find yourself struggling, to find information at that very last minute. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, or maybe I might leave it on for people who want to take in my contact information, and then Dio will take questions if there are any questions.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to present us with that educational piece and providing updated information for a lot of citizens in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're really, really grateful for you for doing that. We have a few questions here that we're going to go over. If you have any more questions, if you're on the Inferno website as a registrant, you can just scroll down, and there's a section there that says Ask Questions. Just write down your question there, submit it, and we'll go through them as we go through the Q&A session. So the first question that we have here is in regards to the visa application process, and they're just wondering, on average, how long does that process take?
For Vista's visa.
For visa application.
Okay. Applications, it depends on what application it is. So either a visitor's visa or study permit or a work permit. Also depends on what country that you're applying for. Right now, though, processing times don't really matter because immigration is not committing to any processing times due to COVID-19. A lot of the officers are not in the office. The only one I can speak to, for example, is the study permit extension. I know that that's taking maybe about a week or so. It's really quick, as at the last time that I submitted. Normally, it could take anything from 2 weeks to a year. It depends on what country you're applying from, and it depends on the actual application.
Awesome, thank you. Second question is here. You stress the importance of keeping to time with the deadlines that are set according to the Canadian government and ensuring that all the forms and submissions are completed in a timely manner and not to wait till the last minute to do so. So if somebody does leave it to the last minute or something happens and their work or student permit has expired, what next steps do they take in resolving that situation?
Okay, so I talked about that. I'll just go back to that slide here. So like I said, I mean, life happens. And so you might find yourself in a situation where your work or study permit has expired. What you want to do is apply for a restoration of status. So if it's within 90 days, you just go ahead and apply for restoration of status. Actually, right now, there is an extension on that, which is really great for this year. So as long as the permit expired after January 30th, you actually have till the end of the year. So I would say that you apply for a restoration of status immediately. And what you'll be doing is you would complete, so if you're a student, you would complete a study permit extension application and also an restoration of status application, and you pay an extra $200 for the restoration of status and send that in. So it's really good that they've extended it till the end of the year for this period. So you want to take advantage of that and, apply right away.
And then just a follow-up question in regards to that. Does that affect their score or their status at all because they have left it to expire? Will that affect their application in the future?
It depends. So if at the time, different things happen. And so depending on the reason, when you're applying for permanent residency, it won't affect anything. But if you're applying for your postgraduate, so if you're a student, when you apply for your postgraduate work permit, for example, there is that requirement that you must have been a full-time student, no break in studies, no unauthorized break in studies. And so when your study permit expired, you can no longer work, which means that you've then taken a break in your studies. So you just have to explain at that point what has happened, whatever you were going through or whatever made that situation happen. Hardly, it depends on the officer, right? But most times they're lenient and they'll let it fly. I've seen cases though where they then say that you're not eligible for a postgraduate work permits, and that person might have to go back to school maybe for another year or so to requalify. But again, best practice would be to include an explanation letter if there is a gap or if there's a red flag in your application.
Thank you. So major takeaway there is to make sure we don't procrastinate as much as possible on those deadlines that are set and try to complete things early if possible. Another question here, they were just confirming a statement that was made. So this person states that you do not need to take an IELTS for citizenship if you have an ECA to show your language of study was done in English language.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. And then we'll just go on to the next question here. It says, what do you do if you missed a semester for both death in the family and financial reasons, but you did not know about getting a letter of permission and a destitute work permit? What can you do as an international student about to finish school and apply for a postgraduate work permit?
Okay, so the destitute work permits, if you don't use it, it's not like you don't have to use it. So don't worry about that. What you would do is you should be able to go to your school and, for them to write a letter for you that you had to take. So it doesn't have to be, you didn't have to get the letter at the time that it happened. You should be able to go back to your school and get that letter. Now, if they're not able to give you the letter, that's fine. What you then do is you would write an explanation of what has happened and include as much proof as possible to show the reason why you had to take a leave of absence. So, again, the immigration officers are human beings. So if you just submit the application without an explanation, then that's when they start to wonder what's going on. But if you've already provided the details, and then it's not just a matter of them contacting you if they need more information, right? So usually I find that writing an explanation letter really helps because it puts, whatever the situation is out there for the officer to consider.
Thank you so much. So the next question here talks a little bit more about the graduate work permit. The person states that they just got their postgraduate work permit, but their work that they will start in September requires that they also do their professional exam, their CPA, simultaneously. They were told as an international student, they need to have a valid student permit. They do have a valid study permit that expires next year, March. Is it still invalid after 90 days because they are now graduate? Do they have to apply for a new study permit?
No, because you're resuming studies, right? So you'd be resuming, completing your CPA, so your study permit will still be valid.
And then I think you touched on this a little bit before. How long does it take to get a work permit after applying, after completing a master's degree in Canada?
To get a work permit, it's as soon as you apply. So again, if you apply while your study permit is still valid, you can actually start working while you wait for a decision. I don't know what the processing times are like right now, just because immigration is not committing to any processing times. Before, it was taking up to 4 months, as at the end of last year. It was taking up to 4 months for my students to get their postgraduate work permits approved. And so that's why I keep stressing that, if you apply before your study permit expires, then you can start working and not have to wait for an actual decision.
Thank you. I'll give a few more minutes for anybody to submit any other questions that they might have for her. In the meantime, could you talk a little bit more about the services that Tutor Consulting provides for students and how to reach out for help?
Oh, okay. So I have my contact information on the screen, so you can follow me on Instagram. We're always posting like updates. Email info@totalconsulting.com, or you can also reach us via the website. So we offer like a range of services. It really depends on what you need. So if it's something as little as just a quick call to confirm something you're not sure about, or if you want us to help you through the whole process of applying, communicating with immigration, or maybe you've had an application rejected and you want someone to help you look at that. It really depends on what you need. Study permits, work permits, visitor records, extensions, permanent residency, provincial nomination. So just really anything immigration related that you need, we can help you with it. And I talked about, guidance review earlier. So again, for most people who are already here in Canada or already, studying or working in Canada, most times you can complete this application yourself, as long as there is no, big red flag that is causing some problems. But sometimes you might just want, a professional set of eyes to look it over. So we do that as well. And that's pretty much it. Whatever immigration services you need, we can provide it.
And then just one more question. What inspired you to get into this field?
So I'm originally from Nigeria, and then I came here, I don't know, maybe 14, 15 years ago. And so when I got here, I'm always looking for information. So I found out that I could work, which a lot of students didn't know that they could work as international students. Things were a little bit different back then anyways. And so I was working and my friends were like, how come you're working, And so then it became a thing where people would message me and say, oh, I'm trying to do this. How do I do this? And then my dad as well, back home, people will message him and say, oh, your daughter is in Canada. Can she help? I want to send my child here. So I started doing it for people. I helped my cousins come, family, friends, and it was taking up a lot of my time actually. And then I was like, oh, this is actually a business that I could do. And then eventually I found out that you actually had to be licensed. So I went back to school and did the diploma in immigration consulting, wrote the exam. I had to rewrite the IELTS. I had to write the academic one to get licensed. And then I think I've been running this business for about 10 years now. And it just, for me, it's helping people, avoid mistakes that could be costly and just helping people achieve their immigration goal. It's like, we won't do anything illegal, but we'll look for a way. And so by the time I'm telling you that, maybe something is not possible, I've tried all possible avenues, to look for a solution. So that's really it for me. It kind of just happened. It wasn't like, I had a goal or something. It kind of just happened, but I'm really, really grateful, and I really enjoy doing it. I get to meet lots of people as well.
Awesome. We just had one more question come in. Is that having a study permit that expires 1 year after your program ends, Are you still in status even if you do not have a work permit yet, but are in the process of getting one?
You're not in status if you've not applied for the postgraduate work permit. So you need to apply. Once you've applied, then you're under implied status. So again, even if your study permit is good for a year, if your studies have been completed, then you have 90 days. Now, I keep repeating the 90 days because that's the standard. But right now, due to COVID, they've extended the restoration of status aspect of it. But again, you don't want to get into any of that. And then the other thing to note is that you still only have 6 months to apply for your postgraduate work permit. So even though the restoration of status has been extended, if you finish your school, December last year, and you've not applied for your postgraduate work permit as at the end of June, you can't get that postgraduate work permit anymore, right? So if you even though your study permit is still valid, there's still the whole matter of your postgraduate work permit and eligibility. And so if you're still within that period, I would advise that you just apply for it right away if you're still within that 6 months. Otherwise, then you might have to maybe go back to school to requalify.
Thank you so very much. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email info@tulunconsulting.com or visit the website as well. It's very important that we realize that the information and services are available to us and for us to take that step further in order to access the information that is given. We thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your presentation, as well as answering some of the questions that our registrants had today. So we're really grateful for everything that God has done in your life and what He's used you to do. And we pray that He continues to glorify His name in your life furthermore, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you to everyone who tuned in. The next session will begin at around 2:45 p.m. So make sure to check for information there, and then we'll move forward from there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Bye.